12-year-old Tiahleigh Palmer was a bright young girl with her whole life ahead of her. But her story is one marked by heartbreak and tragedy. Tia fell victim to a series of events that revealed both the vulnerability of children in the care system and the darker undercurrents of human behavior. Her biological mother, Cindy Palmer, sensing a genuine and immediate danger to her daughter's life due to the abusive behavior of her husband, made the gut-wrenching decision to place Tia in the custody of Child Protective Services. Cindy, herself a victim of domestic violence, hoped this decision would protect her daughter and give her a chance at a safer, brighter future. However, as events unfolded, it became painfully clear that this well-intentioned act would ultimately lead Tia into an even more perilous situation. The challenges for Tia, known affectionately as T by her loved ones, began long before she entered the child protection system. The toxic environment at home had already begun to shape her life, leading to behavioral issues and frequent attempts to escape the chaos. She became known as a troubled child who often ran away from home, seeking refuge from the turmoil of her parents' relationship. Her mother, though well-meaning, struggled with her own circumstances and found herself unable to provide the stability Tia desperately needed. By January 2015, after bouncing between foster families due to her perceived confrontational nature, Tia was placed with the Thorburn family. The Thorburns, living in Chambers Flat, a quaint and seemingly peaceful town about 40 minutes from Brisbane, were considered a model family. Rick Thorburn, the patriarch, ran a food truck business and managed a horse farm, while his wife Julene operated a daycare center from their home. Their two teenage sons, John, 19, and Trent, 18, completed the family. To Child Protective Services, this household seemed like the perfect place for Tia, who by this time had already faced significant upheaval in her life. Initially, the arrangement seemed promising. Tia attended Morrison State High School, just a short drive from her new home. The Thorburns appeared to be adjusting to their new role as foster parents, and outwardly, life seemed to settle into a routine. However, beneath the surface, tensions brewed. Tia, uncomfortable living with two older boys in a new and unfamiliar environment, found it hard to adapt. Though she remained with the Thorburns for 4 months, her struggles never truly abated. On October 30, 2015, what started as an ordinary day turned into the beginning of a nightmare. Rick Thorburn drove Tia to school as usual, then returned home to work on his car. A few hours later, a call from the school shattered the veneer of normalcy. The school informed the Thorburns that Tia had not shown up for her classes. While it was not the first time she had run away, this time felt different. In the past, Tia had been quickly found or returned home on her own. This time, despite Rick's social media post pleading for information about her whereabouts, no one came forward. The Thorburn family knew Tia was eagerly looking forward to Halloween, just days away. She had carefully prepared her costume and was filled with excitement for the holiday. Her disappearance right before Halloween cast a shadow over their household, prompting them to contact the police. Tia was officially declared missing. However, given her history of running away, authorities and even those close to her assumed she would return on her own. The urgency of the situation seemed lost in the belief that this was yet another fleeting episode in a troubled girl's life. Less than a week after her disappearance, on the early morning of November 5, 2015, a grim discovery changed everything. A fisherman called emergency services after finding a body in the reeds along the shallows of the Pimpama River, about 30 miles south of Tia's last known location. The condition of the body was horrifying, extensively decomposed, likely worsened by the humid climate and local wildlife. Upon arriving, police could not immediately determine the deceased's gender or identity, but speculated it was a teenager. The body was clad only in underwear, further intensifying the mystery and horror surrounding the discovery. The remains were transported for forensic analysis and an autopsy. By comparing the body with reports of missing persons in the area, investigators strongly suspected the deceased was Tia. This grim suspicion was confirmed by DNA analysis, crushing any lingering hope of her safe return. The autopsy revealed devastating details. Injuries initially assumed to be animal bites were determined to be inflicted by a human, likely in an act of unspeakable violence. Tia had been murdered. The case, now reclassified as a homicide, launched a full-scale investigation. Rick Thorburn, as the last known person to see Tia alive, became the first subject of police scrutiny. Detectives questioned him extensively. His responses, marked by hesitation and inconsistency, raised immediate suspicions. "You have anything to do with the death of Tia?" "Absolutely not," he replied. "Is there anything you can tell me about this man?" "Nothing at all. I dropped her off." While his vague and contradictory statements hinted at deception, the investigators needed concrete evidence. Hoping to gather additional insights, they questioned other members of the Thorburn family. Rick's wife, Julene, and their 2 sons corroborated his story. Tia was dropped off at school at 7:30 a.m., and no one had seen her since. Their accounts, however, did little to resolve the growing doubts. Detectives turned their focus to Morrison State High School, where Tia was supposed to have been dropped off. After interviewing over 100 individuals, including students, teachers, and staff, it became clear that no one had seen Tia that day. Surveillance footage from cameras outside and inside the school provided conclusive proof. Tia had never arrived. The question loomed large. Where had she gone after leaving the Thorburn home? As detectives pieced together the timeline, they uncovered crucial information from Tia's classmates. 2 female students, close friends of Tia, revealed she had been struggling with severe issues in her foster home. According to them, Tia confided about conflicts with her foster family, including troubling interactions with Rick Thorburn and his 2 sons. These revelations cast the Thorburn household in a new light, suggesting that the seemingly idyllic family might harbor dark secrets. Further investigation into the Thorburn family's dynamics painted a grim picture. Tia reportedly felt uncomfortable and even fearful around her foster brothers, who were significantly older than her. This discomfort had only grown during her stay. Coupled with her previous struggles, it became clear that Tia's life in the Thorburn household was far from the safe and supportive environment she was promised. As detectives dug deeper, Rick Thorburn's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His demeanor during questioning oscillated between nervousness and defiance, suggesting he was hiding something. Investigators now faced the daunting task of unraveling a web of deceit to uncover the truth about Tia's final moments. One of Tia's friends confided to the police that shortly before her disappearance, Tia had begged to be taken away from the Thorburns' home. She claimed she was being mistreated and feared trouble was coming her way. However, the friend, being young herself, could not make such a decision for her family to bring Tia home. She also didn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation, believing it was just another episode of Tia's dramatic outbursts. Tragically, it became clear too late that Tia's fears were justified. Within days of these pleas, Tia was found dead under horrific circumstances. This revelation added a troubling dimension to the case. Despite Tia's apparent cries for help, the police faced conflicting narratives. Investigators, realizing the lack of any other obvious suspect, began to focus more closely on the Thorburns. Yet, the family denied all accusations. They claimed Tia's accounts of mistreatment were fabrications, much like the complaints she had reportedly made while with previous foster families. The police confirmed that Tia had a history of running away and was often described as a troubled teenager. This history complicated the investigation, as it made her allegations appear less credible to some. The Thorburns' neighbors and acquaintances unanimously vouched for the family, describing them as kind, responsible, and beyond reproach. Their daycare business had been trusted by many parents in the community, who could not believe such an upstanding family was capable of harming Tia. With no solid evidence to directly implicate the Thorburns, the police turned their attention elsewhere. They examined other possibilities, including the potential involvement of registered sex offenders in the area. Over 300 individuals were interviewed, but none emerged as viable suspects. Many had alibis, while others no longer lived in the region. The investigation seemed to hit a wall. On December 4, 2015, investigators made a discovery that reignited public interest in the case. About 100 meters from where Tiah's body had been found, search teams located a shoe and her school backpack. These items were confirmed to belong to her, but they offered no new insights into the circumstances of her death. By now, the case had attracted national attention. Media coverage turned Tiah's murder into a cause célèbre, with outraged citizens demanding answers and justice. Vigils and protests were organized, with participants carrying signs and chanting for accountability from the authorities and child protection agencies. Tiah's biological mother became a vocal figure in the campaign for justice. She publicly criticized Child Protective Services, accusing them of failing her daughter. Her interviews on television resonated with many who shared her anger and grief, further fueling public outcry. Protests were held in Tiah's name, with her mother spearheading efforts to keep the case in the spotlight. On the day of Tiah's funeral, over 600 mourners gathered to pay their respects. The majority had never met her in life but were moved by her tragic story. Many wore white and purple t-shirts adorned with her name and hearts, as purple was her favorite color. The ceremony was somber yet poignant, with approximately 400 white roses placed on her coffin. As her hearse departed for a private cremation, purple balloons were released into the sky, symbolizing the innocence and vibrancy of a life taken too soon. Yet, despite the extensive publicity and public engagement, substantial leads continued to elude investigators. The investigation into Tiahleigh Palmer's tragic death had reached a standstill, despite the intense efforts of law enforcement and public calls for justice. Tiah's mother made an emotional plea on television, urging witnesses to come forward and the guilty parties to confess to their crime. The police, in addition to offering a monetary reward of 250,000 Australian dollars, promised immunity from prosecution to any accomplice who came forward with crucial information, provided they hadn't been directly involved in committing the crime. Still, these desperate measures yielded no new leads. Concerned citizens made several calls to report tips, but they all led to dead ends. By the summer of 2016, the police found themselves no closer to identifying the perpetrator, much less apprehending them. Detectives meticulously interrogated individuals with a history of sexual violence, hoping to uncover a lead. However, their efforts were hampered by the advanced decomposition of Tiah's body when it was discovered. This made it impossible for forensic experts to determine the exact cause of her death. The only clue they had was a broken hyoid bone, suggesting that she may have been strangled. With no other leads, investigators theorized that Tiahleigh could have been abducted by a random motorist near the school. The fact that the drop-off area wasn't covered by surveillance cameras only added credibility to this hypothesis. Yet, this was merely a theory, and it didn't bring them closer to solving the mystery. The reward for information remained unclaimed, and the case seemed to grow colder with each passing week. Then, in May 2016, a significant breakthrough arrived. After more than 6 months of fruitless investigation, the state police department received an anonymous call. The unknown informant claimed to have crucial information regarding Tiahleigh Palmer and the Thorburn foster family. According to the caller, the Thorburns had sought out a troubled child specifically to gain increased government benefits. They had no genuine concern for Tiah's well-being, driven instead by purely financial motives. Moreover, the informant confidently asserted that every member of the family could have been involved in what had happened to the young girl. Before police could ask for further details, the informant hung up. Efforts to trace the call were unsuccessful, but the information prompted investigators to revisit the possibility that the Thorburns were involved in Tiah's murder. At the beginning of the investigation, allegations of domestic violence within the Thorburn household had been brought forward by students at Tiah's school. However, those claims were initially dismissed due to a lack of evidence. Now, with renewed determination, detectives returned to this line of inquiry. They began by interviewing Tiah's classmates again, hoping to uncover new details about her life with the Thorburns. During these interviews, one of Tiah's friends made a shocking revelation. Tiahleigh had confided in her about an intimate relationship with Trent Thorburn, Rick and Julien's 19-year-old son. Trent was known as a local heartthrob, charming and seemingly confident. According to Tiah's friend, Tia had believed that what she had with Trent was a genuine relationship. She was young and naive, and Trent had manipulated her emotions, convincing her that their interactions were based on love. Tia, for her part, had fallen for his charms, admiring both him and the horses on the family farm. Yet, at the same time, she was deeply afraid of Trent and the rest of the Thorburn family. The friend's account suggested that Tia was subjected to more than just emotional manipulation. There were strong indications that she had been a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of Trent, and that this abuse was compounded by instances of brutal physical violence. Tia had wanted to run away from the Thorburns, but her fear kept her trapped. It was a heartbreaking realization that Tia had been experiencing this turmoil without anyone intervening to help her escape. With these new statements, police recognized the urgent need for a deeper investigation. They questioned the Thorburns yet again, trying to uncover cracks in their seemingly unified story. However, every member of the family denied any wrongdoing. They insisted that Trent had no inappropriate interactions with Tia and that the allegations were baseless. The Thorburns were well practiced in maintaining their facade, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. Despite the Thorburn family's unwavering denials, the police were determined not to let the investigation fall into complacency. They began placing the family under more intense surveillance, scrutinizing every aspect of their lives, hoping that the truth would eventually slip through the cracks. They worked to obtain warrants for wiretaps and began monitoring communications in and out of the Thorburn household. It was during this surveillance period that the family's sinister facade began to unravel. The police uncovered a series of incriminating conversations between Rick, Julene, and their sons. These conversations revealed the extent of their involvement in Tia's tragic death and their desperate attempts to cover their tracks. It became evident that the entire family had played a role in the crime, whether in the act itself or in the subsequent cover-up. The most chilling part of these wiretaps was Trent's casual discussion with his parents, indicating that they were all aware of Tia's abuse and were actively involved in silencing her to protect themselves. Trent's motivation appeared to be rooted in the twisted belief that he deserved Tia's affection without consequence. He manipulated the young girl, taking advantage of her vulnerability, and when things spiraled out of control, the entire family became complicit in the crime to protect their own interests. On the surface, Rick and Julene Thorburn had presented themselves as caring foster parents, but the wiretaps painted a very different picture, one of manipulation, greed, and cruelty. It was confirmed that the family had indeed sought out a troubled child purely for financial gain. Tia was nothing more than a means to an end, and when she became inconvenient, when she posed a threat to their reputation and freedom, they decided she had to be silenced. The arrest of the Thorburn family shocked the community. The seemingly perfect foster family, who had taken care of other children and had run a respected daycare, was now exposed for their heinous crimes. The public outcry grew even louder, with many questionings how the foster care system had failed to identify such blatant red flags. Due to the mounting suspicions around the Thorburn family, the authorities decided to take decisive action. Their license to operate a home daycare was revoked, and their authorization to foster children was immediately suspended. Behind the scenes, law enforcement officials installed listening devices throughout the Thorburn residence. What they uncovered day after day shattered the previously maintained image of a respectable family. Each overheard conversation painted a chilling picture, gradually revealing the toxic dynamics within the Thorburn household. An image completely at odds with what Rick, Julene, and their sons had tried so hard to project. One conversation that stood out was a family meeting held on October 29, 2015, the night before Tia vanished. During the meeting, Trent informed his parents that Tia had been experiencing significant stomach pain, and they feared the possibility that she might be pregnant. This suspicion was particularly alarming to Rick and Julene, who had recently become aware of Trent's relationship with Tia. What they learned from Trent was even more shocking. Under the watchful ear of the wiretap, Trent admitted that he had repeatedly engaged in sexual intercourse with Tia, his foster sister, over a period of 10 months, the entirety of her stay with them. 19-year-old Trent, aware of the 7-year age gap, feared that any discovery of their relationship would make him a criminal in the eyes of the law. Seeking guidance from his father, He revealed his concerns. Rick, seemingly unfazed, assured Trent that he would handle it, which later transpired to be a dark euphemism for something much worse. Tia had always been visibly terrified of her foster father, Rick. She had an instinctual fear of being alone with him, something her friends had noticed but could not interpret. Other members of the family also held Rick in fearful regard. Behind his outward image as a dedicated father figure lurked a cruel, manipulative, and abusive man. He ruled the household with an iron fist, instilling fear in everyone who lived under his roof. After that family meeting on October 29th, Rick ordered everyone to leave the house, insisting that he be left alone with Tia. They complied without question. Hours later, when they returned, Tia was nowhere to be found. When they inquired about her, Rick simply stated that she had run away and reassured them that the problem was solved, that she wouldn't be speaking to anyone ever again. It became obvious to the rest of the family that Tia was dead and that Rick had something to do with it. But none dared challenge him. When one of the brothers attempted to go to Tia's room, Rick blocked the door and threatened him. After that, everyone fell in line, and the entire incident was hushed up. The story that Rick had driven Tia to school and that she had subsequently disappeared was a complete fabrication. The truth was far more horrifying. In reality, Tia never left the Thorburn household that day. Instead, it became increasingly evident to investigators that she had met her tragic end at the hands of Rick Thorburn while still inside the home. Yet what exactly happened that night remained shrouded in mystery. Rick was careful never to divulge details, even in his private moments, when the surveillance devices would have recorded them. The wiretaps, however, did reveal Rick's consistent efforts to coach his family on what to say and how to behave when questioned by police. His control over his family was absolute, and their fear of him ensured that they complied without hesitation. Law enforcement officials made the tactical decision to bring in Julene and the Thorburn brothers for questioning first, believing that they would be easier to crack under pressure. Slowly but surely, as investigators laid out the evidence they had collected, cracks in their stories began to appear. Under pressure, they each started to reveal more about what had transpired inside that house. The detectives could sense the guilt and fear in their voices as they spoke about the events of that fateful night. One of the most chilling moments during questioning came when Julene spoke about the last time she saw Tia alive.
We were concerned she could be pregnant or something.
And did you have that conversation with Rick at that time?
I think it did.
Okay.
It was mentioned.
Yeah.
But no, pains in the stomach, no.
The last time I saw her, she was in her bedroom, sitting on her bed. Julene said, her voice trembling. I wished her a good night. I told her she should stay there until she was ready to sleep. When asked where Rick was, she hesitated before answering, I believe he was outside the kitchen door waiting for me to return. There was no one else in the house at that time. From this, it became clear to detectives that Rick had orchestrated the circumstances that led to Tia being alone with him that night. In the following hours, Julene and Trent described the palpable fear they had felt, fear of what Rick might do if anyone defied him. I just wanted to go to the police, Trent admitted during questioning, visibly shaken. But I knew if I did, I wouldn't even make it 10 steps out the door before he retaliated. I was terrified. It was a shocking admission, one that highlighted not only Rick's monstrous nature, but also the deep fear he instilled in his entire family. For months, they had lived with the knowledge of what happened to Tia, too terrified to speak out, fearing Rick's violent retribution. Their confession painted a grim picture of a household under siege, a home in which Rick Thorburn's rule was absolute and dissent was not tolerated. Rick Thorburn meticulously arranged everything to appear as if he was protecting his family. He fabricated an alibi and orchestrated a series of events to cover his tracks. However, after an exhaustive examination of surveillance footage near the school, law enforcement concluded that Rick had gone to great lengths to conceal his crime and reinforce the false story he concocted. Surveillance cameras did capture his car driving towards the school that morning, but at no point was Tia seen getting out of the vehicle. The lack of footage showing Tia arriving at the school only confirmed investigators' worst suspicions. Accusations and suspicions began to rain down on the Thorburn family. Julene and Joshua, the eldest son, were accused of providing false testimony and actively attempting to obstruct the investigation. Investigators suspected Trent of sexual assault against Tia, while Rick was believed to have committed premeditated murder. Moreover, the family was thought to have conspired to cover up the crime together. Detectives came to the chilling conclusion that Rick had not only murdered Tia, but had also intentionally disfigured her body to make identification difficult. A grisly detail confirmed by the fact that authorities initially couldn't even determine the victim's gender. However, modern DNA analysis revealed the girl's identity, despite Rick's apparent ignorance of the advancements in forensic science. Beyond the murder, law enforcement officials found themselves compelled to explore even darker suspicions. There were strong indications that Rick had abused not just Tia, but his own children as well. The allegations pointed towards both sexual and physical abuse, painting a horrifying picture of the man who had presented himself as a loving father and responsible caretaker. 9 charges were ultimately brought against Rick, with some unrelated to Tia's murder. Trent, on the other hand, faced charges of incest and perjury for his involvement and lies during the investigation. The investigation also led detectives to a troubling discovery involving Trent. Immediately after Tia's disappearance, a horse owned by Trent had been sold to a new owner. Upon inspection, bloodstains were found inside the horse's stable. This discovery raised serious questions about how far the family had gone to eliminate any trace of Tia and the brutal acts committed against her. The mounting pressure of the investigation and subsequent arrest took a serious toll on Rick's health. On the day of his detention, Rick lost consciousness. His condition was deemed so critical that doctors were forced to place him in an induced coma. After a few days in the hospital, Rick regained consciousness, and doctors suspected he had deliberately worsened his health by taking certain medications, hoping to evade justice. Fortunately, Rick's attempt to escape responsibility ultimately failed, and he had to face the consequences of his heinous actions. The shocking details of Tiahleigh Palmer's murder not only sparked widespread public outrage, but also captured intense media attention. The Australian legal and foster care systems came under heavy scrutiny, facing sharp criticism from all corners of society. How could someone like Rick Thorburn have been allowed to foster children? How could someone with such sinister intentions go unnoticed by the system designed to protect the vulnerable? Finally, all the members of the Thorburn family stood trial. The sheer cynicism, cruelty, and coordinated effort behind their actions stunned the public, who collectively demanded justice for Tia. The prosecution's aggressive approach left little room for the defense's arguments. The evidence against the Thorburns was overwhelming, and the family members started to crumble under its weight. The trial itself was filled with moments that shocked not only the jurors, but also those watching the proceedings. Rick Thorburn appeared in court with a stern face, his demeanor betraying little emotion. He was a man clearly trying to maintain his composure, yet those who knew the details of his crime saw his behavior as callous and unfeeling. Julene and Joshua Thorburn, in their confessions, painted a detailed picture of the events that had transpired within the home. The prosecutor, in his opening statements, outlined a case of systematic abuse, manipulation, and murder. Julene's testimony in particular was a pivotal moment in the trial. With a quivering voice, she detailed how Rick controlled the household, his iron fist dominance over the family, and the night when he decided that something had to be done about Tia. She admitted that she feared for her own safety and that of her children, and felt powerless to stop Rick. Her voice trembled as she described Rick's calm demeanor as he ordered her and the others to leave the house that fateful night, knowing full well what was about to happen. The most gut-wrenching testimony came from Trent Thorburn, who confessed to having a sexual relationship with Tia. He described how he was manipulated by his father into thinking this relationship was somehow acceptable, though he admitted under cross-examination that he knew what he was doing was wrong. The courtroom fell silent when Trent spoke of his suspicions that Tia might be pregnant, and how this had led him to confide in Rick. The prosecutor wasted no time highlighting Trent's selfish motivations, his fear of legal consequences rather than any concern for Tia's welfare. The forensic evidence presented in court further illustrated the horror Tia endured.
At that point, yeah, he just said that Trent had sex with Tia. And Dad proceeded to say that we all had to protect Trent. We all had to keep a story amongst everyone.
Photographs of the crime scene, the bloodstains found in the horse stable, and the graphic details from the autopsy were displayed to the jurors. The autopsy confirmed that Tia's hyoid bone had been broken, a sign of strangulation, and the bruising on her body indicated that she had been beaten before her death. The prosecution made it clear that this was a calculated, premeditated act meant to silence Tia forever. The defense's attempts to portray Rick as a man under immense pressure, struggling to keep his family together, were met with derision by both the prosecution and the public. The prosecutor countered by showing Rick's repeated attempts to cover up the crime, the falsified alibis, and the sale of the horse. All actions that pointed to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. As the trial drew to a close, the jurors were visibly affected by what they had heard. The brutal details of the abuse and the family's efforts to cover up the crime left them with little doubt about the Thorburns' guilt. The prosecution's final statements were particularly powerful, emphasizing the betrayal of trust that had occurred. Tiahleigh Palmer was placed in the Thorburn household by the state under the belief that she would be cared for and protected. Instead, she was abused, exploited, and ultimately murdered by the very people who were supposed to provide her with safety. The jurors deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their verdicts. All members of the Thorburn family were found guilty of various crimes, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, sexual abuse, and murder. The judge did not mince words during sentencing, stating that Rick Thorburn's actions were the epitome of evil. He emphasized that Rick had not only taken an innocent life, but had also corrupted his own family, manipulating them into becoming complicit in his crime. Joshua received a sentence of 3 months in prison, while his mother, Julene, was sentenced to 1.5 years for her false testimony. Their sentences reflected their lesser involvement compared to Rick and Trent, but to many, it seemed an insufficient consequence for their role in enabling Tia's tragic end. Trent, who had raped Tia and later lied to protect his father, received a 4-year prison sentence for incest, obstruction of justice, and perjury. Shockingly, Trent was released after only 16 months behind bars, in 2018, a fact that enraged the public, who believed justice had not been adequately served. Rick, the central figure behind Tia's murder, was sentenced to life imprisonment in May 2018, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 20 years.